Buongiorno. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our session using AI to tackle impossible investigations. Do we really think these investigations would have been impossible without machine learning? The short answer is yes, we would have not been able to do these investigations, but you'll have to stick around for the next hour to find out why we think so. So my name is Boyoung Lim. I work at the Pulitzer Center as a senior editor. Pulitzer Center supports journalists from all over the world on their enterprise reporting projects. So thank you all for joining us on a Saturday morning in this beautiful city of Perugia. So we will introduce our speakers here who have traveled all the way from Ohio, Brazil, Norway, and Seattle. So could you start, Lucia, with who you are, what you do, and how you got into using machine learning for investigations?
Sure. So, hi, my name's Lucia Walinchus. I'm the executive director of ION Ohio. So we're a statewide news nonprofit. So we're essentially a digital magazine. We have our website. We also distribute through lots of local partners. And I got into this just because it really excited me. I realized, wow, the potential for this and all the stories that we could do with that. And it really worked out. So,
Clayton.
I'm Clayton Aldern. I'm a senior data reporter at an environmental magazine called Grist, grist.org. We cover climate, justice, climate solutions. And I kind of stumbled into data journalism by way of computational neuroscience and then public policy on housing and homelessness. And I've kind of sought to integrate some previous quantitative skills into investigative reporting, and sometimes that has meant machine learning and artificial intelligence, but it's been a little bit of a mistake. And I'm happy to speak more about that kind of circuitous path.
Hyury.
Hi everyone, my name is Hyury Potter. I'm a freelance reporter in Brazil. I'm on my second year as Rainforest Investigations Network fellow. On my first year, I wrote for The Intercept, and now I'm writing for Reporter Brazil Newsroom. It's a small newsroom in Brazil with more than 20 years investigating modern slavery, environmental crimes, and money laundering. So I've got into data journalism because at some point of my career, I realized that it could help me to go further on my investigations, on my stories.
And Edward.
Hi, everybody. My name's Edward Boyda. I am a co-founder and lead scientist at a nonprofit called Earthrise Media. We work with journalists. We support environmental and human rights reporting with data journalism writ broad, but specifically satellite-based investigative work. I'm a scientist by background, a physicist, a recovering physicist maybe. And so the question about how I got into machine learning and journalism is kind of backwards for me. I became a machine learning practitioner as part of my scientific research. And when my partner and I began Earthrise about 5 years ago, the impulse behind it was to try to get sort of some of the work that we were doing already, remote sensing, climate science related work, out to make closer connection to people in the world, and just feeling the urgency around climate change and ecosystem degradation, and wanting just to get more eyes on what's happening on the surface of the planet. And so we really made a conscious effort to take our skills and make connections with journalists. And so you'll see an example of that today.
Thank you. So we at the Pulitzer Center are super proud to have worked with these journalists on their projects that they're going to talk about today. It's going to range from abandoned housing issues in Ohio, abandoned oil wells in Texas, and then using machine learning to identify illegal mining and airstrips in the Brazilian Amazon. So we have lots going on in the two Americas. But before we start, I'm going to throw a very dummy question. So for all of you, for 30 seconds, could you please explain what distinguishes using machine learning in investigations from data journalism projects that wrangle big data sets?
Sure, and I'll get into this more in depth in my presentation, but basically it kind of flips the script. So, if you are looking to optimize an algorithm, right, you're deciding what that outcome is, right? You want to code for what are the best, dinners to have at night, right? If you only look at, well, how many times does it get eaten, it would say, you should make ice cream every night for dinner, right? That's not necessarily what you want. You want to go back and see, what are the things that are most nutritious, and then, what are of those, how many items did my family actually eat, right? So it kind of helps you to essentially back solve and find the things that are important instead of telling the computer this is important and find the things.
My answer is very simple. I think it's in the name. In the case of machine learning, there's another brain in the room, right? You are consulting the findings of an additional processor. In the case of machine learning, you are teaching a machine something about the world, and then in an ideal situation, having somewhat of an algorithmic conversation with those findings. So, I think that differs from traditional data reporting, indeed, in that there's a little bit less perhaps imposed, and certainly in the case of unsupervised learning, a little bit less imposed into that quantitative space. It's not to suggest it's entirely objective, right? Obviously, scientists are making decisions when they initiate a training protocol, but by and large, right, we're seeking to establish and indeed unearth some patterns within data that simply, the human eyeballs can't handle. If you have 62 million rows of data, you're not going to be able to get through it, but, a machine might be able to.
Well, I'm just a regular environmental journalist. So for me, machine learning can help us to be more independent from public data, because you can create your own data and you can investigate this own data independent of the government. Because, for example, right now, Brazil has not just a terrible president, but a terrible person as president. So he makes everything as possible to stop investigations, to stop release public data. So if we can have this other side helping us, it's not just a plan B. It's the plan A, in our case.
Yeah, I can piggyback a little bit on what Hyury says. I think to some extent we're creating these large data sets or taking something that's very raw, like in the example that we're going to talk about, we're using the raw data as satellite imagery. Like you take the set of all images that have been captured over the Amazon basin over the last few years, and then try to impose some semantic sense on it. Like instead of just like pixels of different colors, you extract the ability to say this is a mine or not a mine, or you could imagine putting many other categories on that data, and then you have a new data set to work with and do sort of regular data journalism work with, and so it's partly that. It's like sophisticated reworking of raw data in ways that humans may find very, very challenging to do at the scale and scope that we're trying to do it with this work. So.
And thank you everyone for that. And on that note, Edward and Hyury is going to unveil the Amazon mining watch that they've been working on very hard for the past several months or year, is it? So yeah, so it's going to be cool. You're the first ones to see that platform, so stay tuned on that. But we're just going to now jump into each of these projects because, it sounds all good, like having another brain in the room, being able to be independent from your data, but what does that actually look like in real life or real projects? So I'll go to Lucia first on how she did her investigation and how she used machine learning, how it took her project to the next level. So on to you.
Thanks so much. So how do you tackle impossible investigations? This is what you need to know. You need AI and you need Al. That's sort of the theme of my talk. So AI is obviously machine learning. And Al is Al Jenkins. That's this guy right here. He's standing in front of his house. If you see those two stones in the front, so to the right of that stone, actually he doesn't own that. The land bank owns that. And they won't sell it to him. He cuts the grass, that's his fence, and we're going to find out why. So first, what is machine learning? We talked about this a little bit. It flips the script. It's learning what's important from the data instead of telling the computer the optimal outcome. We have so much great data on land. I can tell you, how many bathrooms there are in every single, piece of property in Ohio. I don't know why I need to know that. Land area, amenities, all these other things. In fact, I have, such a big computer with like 3 terabytes of data that obviously this is my daughter's computer that I'm borrowing, or I'm like really into cat stickers. You won't know. So true artificial intelligence would be, the computers are sentient, and then we have a whole lot more problems. But so basically, it's a way of defining different types of machine learning, or shorthand for it. So there's supervised learning, which is like regression. So for example, with housing, can you use home attributes to predict the sales price? Spoiler alert, you can. People do this all the time. Supervised learning, which is classification. So that would be like, can you predict which homes will sell based on the owner data? This is obviously something else people do all the time. And then unsupervised learning, can you define different types of home buyers? I would call this playing with fire. This is something that's very controversial because, how do you define that? But it's really interesting to be able to see, and obviously, goes into the ethics of just how you can separate people. So sort of the OG of machine learning is image recognition, right? So let's say you wanted to program what are the giraffes. That would be pretty easy, right? If animal is greater than, X feet, or sorry, meters, right? Then we have a giraffe, right? But how do you define a dog? A fox is not a dog, but it looks like a dog. And all these things are dogs, the pug nose here and this little corgi, right? So basically, how does the machine do this? It takes thousands of pictures that are hand-labeled dogs and, others that are labeled foxes and so on and so forth. So essentially, this AI algorithm, it's learning which are which. And the computer compares patterns of, each animal's eyes, nose, snout, and says, okay, these are a dog, and so on and so forth. So we're doing something very similar. But really important to note, greater accuracy does not equal a better model. So machine learning is really a process. So there's something called overfitting, and basically, so if the model follows the data too closely, that's not necessarily always good. That could also mean that your data is not good at predicting the future. So for example, if your dog data set has too few Chihuahuas, and not enough Great Danes, it might exclude those Great Danes later, even though both a Great Dane and a Chihuahua is both a dog. So one of the, and I didn't make this up, this is one of the the very first, and I really encourage you to go out there and start learning some of these machine learning tutorials, and this is probably one of the most popular ones. So given passenger data, can you predict who will survive on the Titanic? So all these things about, the price, if they're male or female. I know this is really dark, but it's a good learning exercise. And based on that, because obviously, they put women and children first, they put people who are first class onto a boat first, you can actually learn, and you're sort of able to predict with reasonably high accuracy, who would survive based on if you split your training set in half. So going on to real estate data. So this is the great part. These are all public records. It's fairly extensive. And then just to kind of, backtrack a little bit. So Ohio is sort of, it's the home of Rust Belt magazine, right? So it's an area that's has been economically depressed because of, manufacturing moving out and so on and so forth. So this is a government program that they developed. They said, we have all these abandoned properties, and, they attract litter, they attract crime, they attract homeless people, they attract people who are doing drugs and so on and so forth. So, this is a scourge to our community, and we want, this program where, you can have someone to raise the property, raise as in, level it, and then, you basically, create a green space, which obviously is much better for the community than, sort of a dilapidated property. So this is a great program, but it's a very limited program, right? So they'll never have enough money to actually remediate all the properties that they need to remediate, right? So essentially what we're doing is we're trying to see who gets into this program, right? So this is a issue that, we got a lot of complaints about. But what is the most important decrepit property? It's the one in your backyard, right? If that one hasn't been remediated yet. So, we got a lot of complaints about this, but is this, here's where machine learning comes into it, because is this isolated, or is there a pattern here? So this is, some of the vast amounts of data that we took together and we, sort of stitched together. So there was county GIS data, that's a lot of location data. We took school enrollment data, the Ohio Department of Education, the auditor's data, that's the value, and, the taxes and how much they paid in taxes and so on and so forth. And then obviously we had to know which properties were land bank properties. So essentially what we're looking at here is, given housing data, can we predict which tax delinquent property will be foreclosed upon? Spoiler alert, yes. So using machine learning methods, we looked at this property remediation program, and it goes county by county, right? Some counties were really good at this. Some counties, we were like, wow. So basically, in certain counties, certain factors, such as proximity to valuable properties or school district, actually made a property more likely to be picked for remediation. So for example, this guy is Al Jenkins. He moved downtown in, I think, the 80s, 1980, 1985, something like that. So this guy is a local homeowner, and he also is a local landowner. He's a landlord. So if you were to stand at this property and you would look, all around this neighborhood, it's kind of Swiss cheese. There's a property, there's a blank space, there's a property, there's a blank space. And down the street is the world famous Cleveland Clinic. And, right there, they're putting up, a bunch of MIC apartments, right, for the doctors who are going to live there. So you're seeing this process of, we actually are, we're sort of limiting this program. So it doesn't really make sense. In addition to buying some properties and land bank properties and giving this developer a loan, the city of Cleveland is trying to, facilitating this project, but not this guy, who lives down the street and who owns, several properties in the area and wants to expand his rental properties. So a guy who's just been there forever and is actually, investing in the community. So in addition to land banks, there's also this additional process that they instituted called expedited foreclosure, which is supposed to be faster than regular foreclosure. No one has actually ever done a study on that to see if it's faster. But so basically, the regular foreclosure process, you're probably familiar with this, the prosecutor initiates a case on behalf of the treasurer, sent to the judge's docket. At the sheriff's sale, the winning bid pays off the tax lien. But with administrative foreclosure, it's still filed in the county court, but it's adjudicated at the Board of Revision hearing. So the Board of Revision is usually the people that you go to and you say, my property's not worth, $100,000, it's worth $50,000. My taxes are too high, you're ridiculous, whatever, right? But now, in addition to determining what this property is, and this is a group of realtors, right? These are people who are supposed to know about properties, and now you're giving them this power, essentially, to also foreclose on properties, and you're giving them this power to give the properties to anyone in the community that you want, and you're giving them this power, I can't even make this up, to wipe the tax lien. So, unlike a regular foreclosure, you at least have to pay the back taxes, and citizens at least get, paid for that. In this process, you can only, none of that happens. And surprise, surprise, we found that they would, favor certain people. So this is actually a real thing in smaller counties. So on the right, the land bank seeks foreclose on the property. So basically, the treasurer of Athens County is both the prosecutor and the defendant in the same case. In this particular thing. And this isn't just in Athens County, this is in many more. So anyway, if you would like to read more, we have, a story on how they make land bank decisions. And, we did a story on sort of the conflicts of interest. And then just a sidebar if you want to learn more about artificial intelligence. So sort of the nexus for you is this is a really powerful tool. Use those nerd skills. You know better than anyone. So I'm and I'm still an attorney. There are so many great public records out there that are just waiting for someone to do machine learning on them. And you know better than anyone which documents government officials have to file, where that tax money goes, and so on and so forth. So, when you're thinking about, what metrics agencies use for success, so a lot of times land banks, they pointed to, well, this is a great program because it raises our property values, right? Without actually assessing, well, is that always a good outcome? And that's me. So hit me up later, I guess.
Thank you so much, Lucia. That was great. It's a great example of a small local media outlet using machine learning and combining her expertise on her knowledge about these local institutions and using machine learning. So I'll revisit that later. I have some questions, but on to you, Clayton.
Thanks so much. I've read Lucia's work and maybe until this moment didn't quite realize how similar our projects are in terms of the predictive and classification acts we're undertaking. So I think a lot of what I'm about to say is going to feel methodologically similar, and that's maybe an interesting takeaway here. I find so frequently in machine learning powered investigations we're talking about a lot of the same math being applied to different, in this case, public data sets. The title of our project, which Grist produced in collaboration with the Texas Observer, a magazine in Texas, as well as the Pulitzer Center. The title of the project is Waves of Abandonment, and it's about this phenomenon of orphanage of oil and gas wells in the Permian Basin. So what do I mean by any of that? What is an abandoned well? So you're looking at one now, right? The idea here is that over the course of a given oil well's lifetime, they become less and less productive. Oil and gas companies are getting less out of the ground. And if you're a big company, at some point in that productive life cycle of a well, it's no longer going to make sense for you to operate it. And so what are you going to do? You're going to basically not renew your lease. And a smaller company is going to buy that lease because the profit margins do make sense to them. What happens after that? Well, the same thing. And eventually, these land leases, these mineral resources that are leased in this very interesting manner, end up in the hands of something like a single member LLC, a mom and pop oil shop who is now operating this hole in the ground and getting just a little bit of oil out of it. And then, well, what happens when the price of oil drops at that point? All of a sudden, you're quite sensitive to the price of oil, right? And very early on in the pandemic, for example, we saw these huge downward spikes in oil prices. And so there was a natural question to be asked, well, if you've reached this point of sensitivity to prices, and all of a sudden there are these price shocks, what does that imply for the viability of these small companies? Might we expect some of them to go under, to become bankrupt? And what happens when they become bankrupt? Well, they walk away from their wells. This is a well-understood problem. The states, for example, require oil companies to put up some money when they sign a lease. They say, give us, $20,000, because if something happens and you go bankrupt and walk away, we want to make sure there's money for us to plug that well. Because what happens when a well isn't plugged? It's leaking, kind of fracking water into other groundwater sources. It's off-gassing methane. Right? These are not things that you want to leave open in the ground. You want to ensure that in an ideal world, the company is cleaning up their mess. And in the unideal world, if they declare bankruptcy and walk away, there's money in the state coffers to pay for that remediation. So the state's aware of the problem. They keep lists of what are understood as quote-unquote orphan wells, right? And these are to be distinguished from merely inactive wells, wells that are not producing at the moment. It's not currently profitable to be pulling money out of the ground. But there's an operator on the books. They say, we're gonna still use this thing. We'll get some more money out of the ground in the future. So the state says there's a difference between an orphan well that we're aware of and we're gonna plug, and an inactive well, which is not producing, but somebody's gonna take care of it someday and maybe even use it again. So that's what the state says. And the investigation that we conducted kind of started from this question of what constitutes the state's definition of oil well abandonment, right, oil well orphanage, and does that definition map onto reality in any meaningful way, right? Do the cost formulas that they use to price those bonding requirements line up with reality? Do their understandings of the state of play in terms of which operators are managing what map onto reality? So the point of the project was to look at these vast public data sets and ask a series of questions around the extent to which those state definitions effectively could be trusted to fairly represent reality. Just to kind of take a little picture of what we're talking about. So the Permian Basin, where the investigation focused, is in the southern United States. We're talking about Texas and New Mexico mostly. It's the largest shale play in the country. And right what we're looking at here is just a little spatial chart illustrating those quote-unquote inactive wells. These are wells, and this is kind of circa March 2019 or so. This is a picture of inactivity. And you can see there's plenty of spatial variation there. Different counties have different numbers of inactive wells, and by extension, there are different socioeconomic conditions on the ground. Indeed, there are slightly different regulatory apparatuses between Texas and New Mexico. There's a lot of variation in this data set. And what we wanted to do was build a model that said something along the lines of, given this variation, given the state definitions of what constitutes the difference between inactivity and abandonment, given the wild variation in employment rates and macroeconomic conditions, and indeed perhaps the weather, what might we expect to shake down if we threw those things into a pot and asked if a machine could distinguish between abandoned wells and merely inactive wells? Would those findings map onto state definitions, or might we find something else? So this is a chart that kind of illustrates the frequency of those abandoned wells in the state's eyes around that same time period, something on the order of, let's call it 6,000 wells, more or less, that they say, yeah, we know nobody's coming to clean these up. We're going to have to pay for this problem. And we conducted a series of public records request initiatives. We built a couple of web scrapers. We assembled a very large data set, the 62 million number that I threw out earlier. That was indeed the number of monthly production records for all of the hundreds of thousands of wells in the state of Texas over the past, let's call it 60 years, right? Because it's useful to know if you're asking a question about oil well abandonment, how productive has a well been over its lifetime. You need all of those data points. You need to know how deep a well is, right? Because there's probably a different cost function associated with a fracked well that's extremely deep versus an older well that may be shallower. You need to know where it is, right? The actual GIS coordinates. You need to know if the owner of that well, right, the person who's operating the lease, do they even live in the state? That's useful information, because if they don't, maybe they have less incentive to care about the outcome of the remediation in practice. So we throw all these variables in a pot, and we ask, can a machine distinguish between inactive wells and abandoned wells, given the pre-existing definitions on behalf of the states? And the answer is yes, you can do a pretty darn good job, actually. Right? This is almost a linearly separable problem. So the state's definitions mean something, right? You can distinguish between the classes. But what's interesting is that you can't do it all the time, right? And in fact, there's this misclassification problem wherein the machine says, oh, that's an abandoned well. And we look at the list and say, well, no, the state just says it's inactive. And so we have this population of misclassified wells, wherein the algorithm suggests they're abandoned and the state says they're inactive. So there's this discrepancy, and we want to learn more about this population of wells. And by the way, it's quite a bit higher than the state's estimates would suggest, almost by definition, right? We're finding more wells that we argue statistically ought to be considered orphaned in this data set. And in fact, it's larger by about a factor of 2 or 3. If they say we've got 6,000 wells on the books that are orphaned, we say something like, oh, it looks more like 20,000. And so this is a problem, right? We want to know what the story is with these wells. We want to know what constitutes that ambiguity. Why are they falling into this gray area? And so then we run a series of additional models that ask questions like, what's the difference between the wells that are misclassified and the quote-unquote truly abandoned wells in the eyes of the state? And you kind of iteratively run some stats on those two different distributions of attributes. And it turns out to be the case that the main difference is the fact that the wells that are not considered by the states to be orphaned at a given point in time only fail to meet that state's definition of abandonment because they haven't been inactive for long enough, right? And so this is a really important point. We're all of a sudden realizing that what we're looking at is a population of wells that everybody is kind of just getting the horse blinders onto and is understanding are going to be abandoned in the future, but have not yet met this arbitrary threshold that says, well, they're not inactive for long enough, so we can't consider them orphans yet. And so this is where this title comes from. This is this wave of future abandonments that we think we're looking at. And in fact, given the median time of inactivity of the wells that fall on the state's inactive well list, if you compare that chunk of time to the median amount of time that the newly misclassified wells have been inactive, you can come up with a pretty good estimate that says something like, yeah, these 13,000 wells that we didn't think were orphans before, they're probably going to be on that orphan well list in about 4 years. Okay, and so then we take our predictions and we show them to the states and we say, by the way, this is a big problem. You're undercounting your orphan well problem by about $1 billion, which is significant because you have a fraction of that amount of money in the bank. And they look at the list and they say, yeah, I mean, a lot of these operators that you're flagging, we know they're problematic. They have environmental problems left and right? They're in violation of a handful of regulations. We're tracking them. That's true probably 70% of the time. And then there's this other chunk of operators that you've identified that aren't on our radar at all. And that's really interesting and worth us as a regulatory body following up on. And so that, that's very rewarding to hear as a journalist, right? The other extremely rewarding aspect of this project is the fact that, we published this thing a year ago. We put our cards on the table. We said, here are our predictions. But 365 days have passed. And we've had an opportunity to evaluate the findings of the model. And indeed, a couple weeks ago, New Mexico updated its orphan well list, which it does regularly. This is a common practice, right? You want to indeed stay up to date with respect to the scope and scale of the problem. In New Mexico, for example, it's the smaller circle on the right side there. Much smaller economy than the oil economy of Texas, but still quite significant. At the time we built the model, New Mexico had something on the order of 700 orphan wells on their lists, and we said, yeah, but you're going to see about another 400 within the next 4 years pop onto that list. And they released their orphan well list a couple of weeks ago, and already half of the wells that we predicted would be orphaned in the next 4 years are already on that list. So in fact, our model was quite conservative. It's performing extremely well, and we think there's good reason to believe that the abandonments in question are going to continue into the future. And so there are some really serious policy questions here about what does it mean to put up money for bonding if there's not enough money in the coffers? What does it mean to allow the continuous operation of leases like these if they're just left as holes in the ground? So that's the point of the investigation, and I'm very grateful to have spoken about it here and worked on it with so many lovely people in this room. Cheers.
That's great that you can actually validate your investigation from a year and you're seeing that happen, although that's sad that it's happening. Well, we'll move now to the Brazilian Amazon. We'll talk about the Amazon Mining Watch and Hyury, our Rainforest Investigations Network's fellow, Hyury's project. So. Oh, there we go.
Hi, everybody. Okay, there we go. First, I want to thank Pulitzer Center for hosting, and the IJF for bringing us together to this beautiful spot. I mean, it's like unspeakably beautiful, of course. And there's the cappuccinos, and there's the couples kissing under the porticos in the rain. But I have really enjoyed getting to speak about our work with this crew that you see up here. And I think the range of projects that you're seeing is really interesting. What I'm going to show you is much closer to what Lucia called like the OG of machine learning, like recognizing objects in images. But what you saw with the other speakers are just like sort of point to the possibilities of this technology. Like you take almost any data set, you can. We're all doing pattern recognition and trying to draw out interesting, like higher level, insights and patterns from that data. And I think just, the world, like machine learning and artificial intelligence has come to the cusp of, being relatively easy to practice with and relatively sophisticated in its capabilities, that you're just seeing kind of the tip of the iceberg of what you can think of doing in the journalistic field with this. The intelligence in the word artificial intelligence just points to, like, in the best cases, pattern recognition, which is even better than human. So like if in the recognizing the dog example, like if you have a dog that's like slightly hidden, or like I was reading very late last night something about these coyote wolves that are terrorizing people in Toronto, and like they're not sure if it's a coyote or a wolf. Like in the best cases, the machines are better at identifying which species it is than even humans if it's well trained. So the project that I'm going to talk about is an AI-based investigation into open pit gold mining in the Amazon rainforest with Hyury. Hyury does the hard, interesting work of figuring out who the players are and the money is behind a lot of these operations, and then sticking it to them and with really interesting concrete consequences that I hope he'll tell you about. So I'm just like pre-bragging for him a little bit here because it's really awesome work that he's done. But the role of the AI in this is as follows. It's an automated system to ingest and read satellite imagery. In this case, it's Sentinel-2 imagery from the European Space Agency, and then determine where mining activity is taking place. And this is good for sourcing leads for further investigation, and it has the capability of monitoring on an ongoing basis new mining activity in places that are remote, hard or dangerous to access, and really spread across the better part of a continent. Let's see. So I just want to orient you and talk a little bit about the type of mining that we're talking about here and what's at stake with it. Excuse me. Sorry, just a second. So this is a process, it's surprisingly widespread throughout the Amazon basin. It's environmentally destructive, it's dangerous for indigenous communities, and often linked to organized crime. And this graphic kind of was from previous work with Reuters that kind of sketches out how this works. I hope, yeah, you can, I wonder if I can expand it a little bit there, maybe. So basically what happens is miners go to an area, they chop down the rainforest to bare earth, then pump water through the sediments, introduce mercury, which is a toxin or toxic substance, to liberate the gold from the sediments, and then that toxic water gets left behind in these kind of wastewater pools, mud mixed with this mercury-laden water, often on the banks of tributaries of the Amazon River system. And here again, I'll zoom this. This is some pictures of what these mine scars left behind look like. Here you see some winding along the banks of a river. You see characteristically, these brightly colored pools mixed with mud. This is all, relatively recently rainforest. And this dark green here is the intact rainforest. You can just see it's just like scorched earth kind of destruction left behind. Here in the right picture, ooh, that didn't work like I wanted it to. In the right scene here, you see one of these airfields that is the subject of our current work, Hyury and me. Hyury's working to trace these illegal airfields that often pop up are places where miners smuggle gold out and into global supply chains. And so we're using this data that we're generating, the location of these mines, to find areas where the mine is new and expanding, and then cross-referencing that with government database of mining requests to sort of push the investigation deeper into the actors behind this work. So at Earthrise, we've been working on this for a number of years. I think we're maybe now 9 stories deep into this theme of exploring illegal mining activity in the Amazon basin, and several of which have been with Hyury. And we're doing that with a mix of human and artificial intelligence. It started with very much like human grunt labor, and I'll in a minute show you sort of like where that line, it made sense to draw a line between the human and the artificial. But that sort of background work has been very important, and the human-machine interplay is very important in this, because the way that we build the artificial intelligence is, first we need to understand for ourselves what these things look like, where they are, collect examples of these mines. Also, we collect examples of things that are not mines, like fields, forests, ranches, cities, and then we go and try to build a model. And you don't have to read this slide if you don't want to, but this is a little bit about how this works technically. What we do is we create sort of like a mathematical scaffolding. It's called a neural network But it's eventually a statistical model of what mines look like in satellite imagery. And by feeding these examples that we've collected to the machine, it learns the parameters of the model that allows it to distinguish between what is a mine and what is not a mine. And it distinguishes on the basis of shape and also color, including colors of light that are captured by the satellites that are invisible to the human eye. So it's like this three-step process. Collect the examples in the imagery and label them by hand. That's painstaking work, but we had the previous experience and sort of like data to work with. Train the model, have it learn, the mathematical parameters to express this, and then put new imagery through it to find new mines. Yeah, so now I get to show you the cool new thing. Let's see if we'll go to the web here. Okay, so we have worked on this, and now just launched yesterday. I'm excited to show this. This is a joint project with the Pulitzer Center and Earthrise. It's to create an open data platform that presents this mining data and the code behind it, with the hope that it becomes, useful for journalists who want to pursue stories like this into the future.
Edward, can anyone visit this URL and see this now live?
Yes.
Great.
AmazonMineWatch.org. So I'm going to give you a tour of this platform. So one of the things that's really surprised me, even having worked on this for a long time, is just how widespread this phenomena is in the Amazon basin. All the yellow that you see on this map are mining detections that the computer has made. And there are some like major areas that everybody knows about. Like there's Bolivar state in Venezuela and Suriname, and the Tapajós River Valley in central Brazil, and Madre de Dios here in Peru. And just like zoom in so you'll see what this looks like. Again, just like there's a scale down here at the bottom. This is a kilometer, and you see just like, vast swaths of the rainforest have been turned into this kind of toxic sludge here. In this area, there's some interesting local government partnerships going on to try to reduce and control this phenomenon, but elsewhere it's proliferating rapidly. Let's see. So I said, pointed out like there are these big areas, but also just like you see it almost, in surprising places. So just like mixed in with agribusiness here, and like these were, former rainforest lands which are now been converted to ranches, and you see these mines just, proliferating in the river valleys, just mixed in with, the ranching activity.
And do we know whether these are illegal activities or legal activities, and how can journalists make the best use out of this platform?
That is what Hyury is going to talk about.
Great.
Yes, that is a good question. The majority of this, or a substantial fraction of this is illegal on various counts, and Hyury can tell you more about this. But you see that, like, this is an area where we are currently working. This is north of the Tapajós River in Brazil. And you see that the underlying imagery that we're displaying here, this is Mapbox-based map imagery, actually doesn't even show you the mines. You see the dark green here, it just looks like rainforest, and it's just a sign of how recent this activity is. We have this other sort of like lower resolution imagery, which you can look at, but you see this is all popping up in the last couple of years, this activity, and this is where the area where we're exploring some of these airfields. You see those long straight lines, those are the airfields that these miners are using when they've completed the mining. So there's generally not good road access to these areas. They're often in protected eco-reserves or indigenous territories that the miners are not supposed to be operating in. I mentioned sort of this human-machine interplay, and when we got started doing this, the first story, that Reuters story, was on mining in the protected Yanomami indigenous territory in farther northern Brazil. It's like actually quite a big territory, but in the scheme of the Amazon basin, it's quite small. And in this case, I was sifting through imagery by hand and marking up some of the mines that you see. Let's see, we would go back. You can see, should we see? Here, the imagery is even worse here. These are actually all good detections, but the imagery, you can see there the scattered spots. So I was marking up those by hands, and then we have an education program at Earthrise, and we recruited about 100 high school students to help find these mines, and got enough data to publish a story about this activity here, which is really impacting the local communities, a lot of whom are uncontacted as they have chosen to remain separate from modernity. But the miners are coming in illegally and operating there and bringing disease and violence, violent conflict with them.
And
Yes.
I would love to revisit your collaboration with the high school students soon. We're running a little short of time. I would also love to get questions from the audience. So, yeah, thank you, Edward. Could we move on to
I'm good.
Hyury's?
Thank you.
Can we slideshow? I'm not. Okay. Hi again. Well, as I said before, I'm not a data journalist. I'm not a data scientist. I'm just a curious journalist about data. And when I struggle during investigation, I ask for help. Most of the time, I keep asking help from data scientists, the guys with the brain. And Edward can tell you later how annoying can I be in asking for help. And after all this brilliant work with collecting data and what comes next? What comes next? It was Boyoung question. So we have this great database, unique database that we built, and it's what is this? What is this? What he gets? He gets from the big Amazon. He gets geolocation data. We don't have names related to these dots in the middle of the jungle. So that's our job here. That's the old journalism job, basically. We need to understand if this land where we spotted an airfield or illegal mining, it's related to a company, it's related to a person, maybe a politician, it happens a lot, or it's related to the government, it's a protected area, or it's just public land. And how we can do that? We go to another kind of sources, geolocated data. When we work just with, the first step is working with the data. So we need to relate these dots, these locations. We need geolocated data. And in Brazil, we have geolocated data related to mining requests, environmental fines, land registration, and we have a database of registered airfields. So if we spotted 2,000 airfields in the Amazon, half of this number are illegal because we overlap with the registered airfields, and we can separate the good ones from the bad ones. And after that, we can pick some names of the companies, big mining companies we can find. It's not a surprise. And we can look in public company files in Brazil, how these companies, these businessmen are doing their job. You know, they have lawsuits against them, something like that. And we have this part of the investigation related to databases, and the other part is interviews, to talk with government employees on the record and off the record, specialists, geology researchers, federal prosecutors, environmental lawyers, local NGOs because they have access to local communities, indigenous communities, and that's the playbook to work with this kind of data, geolocated data. And after that, we still didn't publish our project about illegal airfields, but we'll publish it very soon, and I promise. And but during our investigation, we got some tips of illegal companies, illegal mining companies, and I asked Edward help because we had this tip. Okay, the name of the company is Ghana Gold. They are doing something bad, but we need to see that how it looks. It's really bad, and so Edward sent this picture, this satellite imagery, and we can see. Okay, it seems like a big mining company. They are legal. They are operating illegally, and that's what we investigated, and we found a lot of bad behavior of this company. They didn't have any kind of legal, any regular license, environmental license to operate. But the government allowed them because the government in Brazil now allowed everything in the forest. And just to be quick, what we found during the investigation, a lot of accomplishments from this company. For example, they are the #1 gold mining company in the Amazon, extracting gold without a legal, regular environmental license. They extracted more than 30 times what is permitted on this area. And this mining pit is within a protected area. So they are completely out of the law here. And we published our first story on October. No, it was in September on The Intercept Brazil, and Monga Bay published an English version in October, exporting all our findings. And but we keep investigating this company. Why we are investigating our airfields project, and during that, and we find out a lot of interesting things. For example, they had this company 1 year before our investigation. They made this deal with the state government and another big mining companies in the Pará state in the north of Brazil. This agreement was basically they will deliver that gold to a new gold refinery they were building. That this other company were building in the second largest city in the Amazon. It's my hometown, Belém. And okay, they are building. Pará State is the state. Edward showed this. It's where the Tapajós area is located. It's the most conflicted area of Brazil now. It's the most conflicted state in Brazil when we talk about illegal gold mining. So they are building a gold refinery. It will be the biggest gold refinery of Brazil in the middle of the state most affected by illegal mining. And okay, who is this guy behind this gold refinery? It was not surprised. It was a guy with a really, really bad historic on gold business. It was a Belgian tycoon that 2 years before he and his brother were convicted in Antwerp justice for money laundering and fraud with gold business. And there's a lot of articles and reports on these two Belgian tycoons on the past years. The main report is from the incredible investigative organization named the Sentry. They spotted a lot of illegal activities from these Belgian companies on Uganda and the Democratic Republic of Congo.
Hyury, how did you find those with machine learning?
What?
How did machine learning play a role in this, finding this?
On this case, it happens. We had this tip about Ghana gold at first, and after that, during this period, it was in the beginning of 2021. Edward was still understanding and building his machine learning tool, and so it started with traditional journalism,
Okay. Okay.
basically. But after that, Edward helped us with a lot of information about the airstrip, about the illegal mining, the size of
Great,
how they
great.
grew up. So
I'm so sorry to interrupt, but we have 1 minute, so
okay. We published this story. One interesting thing about this is that these Belgian guys, we can track their gold because they are listed on Security and Exchange Commission on the United States. So we could track their gold to big giant tech companies on the United States. For example, Amazon buys gold from them, Tesla buys gold for them, Starbucks buys gold for them to build coffee machines, and Dell Computers buys gold for them. For this investigation, we had the help from Belgian journalist, Christopher Clarks. He published a story on his magazine, Knack magazine. And after that, we published a third story about Ghana Gold, when we had a leak of WhatsApp message, audios and text message, because the president of the main environmental office in Brazil was pushing a subordinate employee to put down the embargoes that Ghana Gold suffered after our first story. It was a really good impact of first story. And one interesting thing I discovered yesterday is that we published this story on 26th on March, and 4 days later, the government environmental agents visited again the Ghana Gold Company and find again the mining, because they were not respecting the previous embargo. So it was another good impact of our.
So Hyury has been publishing story after story that has made huge impact in Brazil. So I'm so sorry we ran out of time, but I just wanted to ask one really quick question that I will give you 30 seconds each to talk about. Was there another way to have done these investigations without machine learning? Or was this an impossible investigation without machine learning? Are you bluffing to us? 30 seconds.
And so, I mean, for example, on this story, I brought a bunch of reporters down. I was like, hey, we really need to go to 90th Street. And they said, what's on 90th Street? I said, no, you have to trust me. So the answer is no. Using this machine learning, I was able to find these outliers, and then, I was able to go there, and I wouldn't have had those tips had I not been able to verify that.
Clayton?
No. Simply no. I mean, we could have looked at these distributions and squinted at them and made a series of assumptions, but we needed the model to say anything concrete.
Great. Hyury and Edward?
What I just was saying briefly was we could start in this small area of the Amazon, and first I do it by myself. Then I try to recruit some students to do it. If you want to know what else is out there in the on this continental scale, find new things that you didn't know in areas you didn't expect, that's when you want to turn to the computers for aid, and that's kind of that has seeded some of our further work, these discoveries from the automated detections.
Well, for me, in this past experience, no, because we can go even much further when we are investigating with this kind of help. When we're talking about illegal mining or illegal airstrips in the forest, we have to put on our mind that we are talking about a lot of people with a lot of money. A company that makes 1 billion reais or $200 million a year. So in legal terms, we have to walk strict in the line So when we have this kind of help with locating this, spotting the illegal mining and following how this grow up, how it is growing up, it helps us a lot to analyze this data, to be more confident in what we will write about it. So I'm with the guys here. No.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone. We wanted to get questions from the audience, but we just couldn't get to it. If you visit Amazon Mining Watch, you can explore this platform a lot more. And if you go to pulitzercenter.org, you can find all of their works published on our website. You can find out how they did it and reach out to us. Like, we'd be happy to work with you, talk to you about our work, and cover the questions that we haven't been able to get to. I apologize for that, but thank you so much for your attention. And we'll be hanging out there for questions you might have. Just meet us there outside. Thank you so much.
Thank you.